The South African National Taxi Council has denied claims that its members are still receiving COVID-19 relief funds. Santaco says the Transport Department is paying outstanding relief funds to operators that did not get any help due to delays. Joining us is Rebecca Phala, who is the Santaco spokesperson. Rebecca, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this afternoon. So just clarify to us with regards to how many taxi operators are still awaiting those outstanding COVID-19 relief funds, and what's the process to ensure that they receive these funds?
Good afternoon, Katlego, and to your viewers. Let's first correct your introductory sentiment. We're not denying that our members are receiving the funds.
Okay.
We're denying that the funds are being given to members who are not tax compliant and are not deserving of the funds. You've correctly said the reason why there has been a delay and the reason why we still are having members receiving their monies years after the pandemic and the ex-gratia payments were declared is because there have been challenges, inclusive of the reality of the backlogs in terms of the issuing of operating licenses for our members, which is a big prerequisite that they would need to meet to be able to qualify for the funds. The understanding that we have, as you would have seen with the statement that the department has released, is that they have to this point released the funds to just over 80,000 of the operators. The number of those that are still awaiting cannot be confirmed because the payments are continuing even as we speak now. But the understanding that we have determined is that we've got at least the next 6 months for all the payments to be processed. And so in the meantime, the industry is being encouraged to empower our members to ensure that they put in their applications so that they're able to get the monies that they well deserve.
So let's go back to the issue of compliance. What is the criteria in terms of what they need to be compliant about, and where's the disagreement with regards that those that are non-compliant are still being paid?
So we don't necessarily have disagreements per se in terms of the requirements. So the biggest reason why we've been having these delays is because of some of the challenges I've cited, inclusive of the backlog in terms of the releasing of the operating licenses by provincial regulatory entities. The requirements are as follows. They would need to be a South African citizen. They would need to show that they have got an operating license that is valid. If they do not have an operating license, they must show a proof of a receipt to say that they have applied for a license and they are waiting for it to be released. And they also have to, importantly, prove that they have got a tax certificate to show that they are paying tax in accordance with SARS and the South African law. Once they have got all those documents, they put in their application. The vetting process has to be happening from the part of government. And then once all has been clarified, it will then be distributed. But it's also important that we must mention that initially the amount that was being paid was 5,000 Rand per operating license. When former Minister Sindisiwe Chikunga announced that there would be an extension, we were then told that there would be an additional 2,200 Rand. So some of the monies that are being distributed now are in fact add-ons following the increase that was announced by the former minister.
Speaking about that increase, I mean, Minister Barbara Creecy has mentioned that an additional allocation within the 2025 budget would be made. How does Santaco view the continued allocation of funds for the next financial year, and what impact do you think this would have on the industry?
Look, the industry has been one of those that's been hardest hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. As we speak now, majority of our members are still struggling to meet their monthly payments of vehicles and still be able to fend for ensuring that they pay for all other operational needs. So any monetary assistance will always be appreciated. And for that, we really also want to send our appreciation to the department that they've gone as far as extending the period with the understanding that the manner in which the application process is undertaken is one that is not necessarily the most familiar for many of us in the industry. And hence we've had to, go back to the drawing board and find many more ways to really complement our operators and ensure that all of them are going to make the payments. But look, the reality of the matter is, as and when we've got conversations such as these, we then take a moment to reiterate the call that we've been making and continue to make, that the taxi industry, just like many other modes of public transport, needs to be subsidized so that we don't have to feel the brunt as much as we're doing, whilst we are in the process also continuing to be the biggest and foremost transporter of many South Africans.
Well, speaking of that need to be subsidized, I mean, there are critics such as Musi Maimani, who argues that the payouts is actually an insult to taxpayers, especially as essential public services face underfunding.
Look, we're not going to directly respond to the statement made by the political figure. We are an apolitical organization, and we're merely responding to these questions because they've made their way into public discourse. Be that as it may, it cannot be true, and we've been trying to dispel this myth for quite a while now. I've just said to you when I outlined some of the requirements for operators to qualify to be given these monies in the form of the payments, that they would need to produce that they are tax compliant. So for there to be statements continuing to be made that the taxi industry is not deserving of this ex gratia amount of money and that we are not tax compliant is entirely false. Why else then are these monies being distributed? Because we've just said that the requirement is that you've got to show proof that you are tax compliant. So we're not too certain where this narrative is coming from. It is entirely false.
And lastly, just what are some of the long-term solutions as Santaco that you're looking at in improving the services of taxi operators within the country and just ensuring that the business does grow and become a contributor to the economy in the way that it should?
When we came out of the 2020 National Taxi Lekgotla alongside the Department of Transport, we resolved to professionalize the taxi industry, ensure that it is corporatized so that our drivers and other workers within the ecosystem of the taxi industry are employed sufficiently and in accordance with the legislation that would be sitting with the Department of Employment and Labor. Since then, we've formed a working group with the Department of Transport and institutions such as CIPC, the Department of Employment and Labor, TITA, SARS, and many others, in an effort to formalize the taxi industry. But most importantly, we're also working hard to remove cash from the taxi industry, because we find that because we remain so cash-based, a lot of our income gets lost in the daily operations, and there's also the threat of violence that sometimes seeps in. So we're working hard to professionalize the industry, corporatize it, but most importantly, to remove cash, hard cash from the industry so that there is much more heightened income basis. But we're also diversifying the manner in which we're doing business. So you will start to see the taxi industry going into the fuel space, going into the vehicle parts space, and many others, as in accordance with what we resolved in 2020 after the National Taxi Lekgotla.
All right, Rebecca, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this afternoon. That's Rebecca Phala, the Santaco spokesperson, speaking to us. They're just clarifying with regards to those COVID-19 relief funds that are being received by some of their operators.